Welcome everybody. I am, as advertised, Dr. Charlie Ball. I am presenting on the situation about the situation in the graduate labour market in the UK right now, as far as we know it. Now, as we're well aware, a lot has changed this year. It goes without saying, when obviously pandemic has thrown a great many things into turmoil. One of the things that has changed quite substantially is the nature and sources of information that we get on graduate employment. On the labour market in general, graduate employment in particular. There is a lot more work going on to trying to work out what is going on in employment in the jobs market than there would ordinarily be. But a lot of it is taking place on much shorter and more compressed timescales. So we have more information, but with the best will in the world, even the most enthusiastic advocates of their own work would admit that a lot of the information that we're getting is not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily go through the same quality checks that it would have done 12 months ago in order that timely information be put out to people. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to go through the data, what we know about the current state of the labour market in the UK and the graduate labour market in particular. But bear in mind, a lot of this is very heavily caveated. A lot of this information is collected at pace. A lot of it is taken very rapidly from samples which may subsequently turn out to not be wholly representative. However, most of the information that we get is pointing in similar directions and is borne out by all the anecdotal evidence that we have. So we can be reasonably confident that much of this data is as accurate as it can be under the circumstances. There are areas where it is difficult to use the data that's available and the information that's available to synthesize a truly accurate picture of what's going on. The most crucial of these to many of us is on a regional level, because different data sources are giving us contrasting and conflicting information. So at the moment, we haven't got a lot of really good quality information about what's going on a regional and local level. There are various different organisations doing various different surveys, and they're not always coming up with the same answers or even similar answers. And other sources of information that we've got on activity, particularly in urban areas, so interesting data on footfall and so forth from a variety of actors, are also not always in alignment. Where I can, I'll flag these issues up. So that's hay fever, not COVID-19. You might all be welcoming this beautiful bright weather, but for me it's just pollen hell, and my hay fever has been messing around with my biliary this summer. Sorry, I digress. Where we know about regional and local information, I'll get as much info as we can, but do bear in mind that there is a conscious reason why I'm not going to cover a great deal of that just yet, and that's because we haven't had the chance to delve into the information to the extent and in the detail that we'd like, because it's hard to do. So let's kick off. Where are we at the moment? Well, the UK graduate labour market improved significantly in July, and the early suggestions suggest it improved further in August. We're nowhere near back to where we were pre-pandemic in January and February, but we're significantly better than we were in April and May. It's also worth stressing that, and I'll talk a little bit about this shortly, the data that came out today on the labour market, although downbeat, and most of the reporting has been quite downbeat, was actually a little bit better than most labour market specialists feared. And it looks like the worst case fears on the labour market, fingers crossed, are not actually coming to pass. That said, what is happening is still not exactly a bed of roses, but it looks like some of the worst cases we were fearing back in April or May are not necessarily taking place. The level of vacancies is currently running at about 50% of normal rate, but that's across the whole economy. The graduate economy seems to be faring slightly better than that. Depending on where you're looking, it's probably 55–60% of where it ordinarily would be. In healthcare, it's about 80 to 85%. That's much the strongest sector of the economy right now in terms of vacancies. In the arts, it's around 25 to 30%, which is one of the worst affected sectors and is highly graduate. But by and large, most of the sections of the economy that have fared the best are largely graduate employing. The graduate labour market has suffered significant damage, particularly in the arts. And the arts is probably the worst affected sector of all in the UK. But things are far worse than for non-graduates. Retail, wholesale, hospitality, tourism have all taken a fearful hit and are all largely non-graduate roles. And so the situation for people who haven't been to university is significantly worse than for graduates, although of course there are caveats. If you graduated this summer, it is not a great time to be looking for jobs. Many key graduate employment sectors, health, social care, IT, finance, have been much less affected than other areas of the economy. As I mentioned, retail, hospitality, travel and accommodation employees have all taken hits, and many of them will be long-term and will have long-term, possibly permanent impacts on things like business models and viability. So the sectors experiencing less disruption tends to be heavy recruiters of graduates. Health and social care are the obvious ones. Vacancy levels and in some local areas are running at or above normal levels, but certainly across the UK. The pandemic has exposed the fact that we went into the pandemic critically short of medical and social care employees. We are still critically short of medical and health and social care employees, and we will leave pandemic critically short of health and social care employees. I said medical briefly, that was a slip of the tongue. It's not just doctors and nurses, it's healthcare professionals of all kinds. And actually one of the that's emerged over the last few months is that there's a substantial minority of COVID sufferers who take a significant period of time to recover. And those people need specialist support from some of our some healthcare professionals that are in shortest supply. People like physiotherapists and occupational therapists and dietitians all have a crucial role in rehabilitation, and we simply don't have enough of any of them. At the moment, education is also recruiting strongly. Education has gone up and down quite substantially during the pandemic, but the simple fact of the matter is we need teachers. We need education professionals, and education in schools and colleges and universities have been identified as absolutely crucial to the economic and social well-being of the country. We do have some issues with the fact that a lot of NQTs didn't get the work experience that they would have liked over the past few months, and have had to go into the classroom and starting new terms, not without necessarily having the level of work experience or the kind of work experience that we would hope for. We're hoping that this won't cause issues further down the line, but the sector is braced on the quiet for teaching dropout and pressure on teaching staff. IT and financial services seem to be holding up well, business services to an extent as well, but they don't currently seem to be recruiting as much. They're consolidating and redeploying. A number of these organisations are also, and we hear this across transnationally as well, it's also a subject of conversation in the US. A lot of big recruiters cut or deferred their normal recruitment round that would have happened before the summer or in early summer. And many of them were at least considering returning to a formal recruitment round, but certainly recruitment in the autumn as they got a clearer view of their employment demands. Again, we're hearing mixed messages from employers. Some quite large ones have now concluded that they have the staff that they have the levels of staff that they need, and are focused on redeploying from divisions that are not necessarily in their future plans now in a new working environment, to divisions that need strengthening. Others are still thinking, well, there are going to be profound changes in business and these take place, and we're likely to need new personnel. The key way to look at this is quite simply that the economy in general, and graduate employees are no exception, have essentially gone through a colossal 5 years of business transformation in about 4 months. And so a lot are still working out exactly what the long-term significance and what the long-term needs of their businesses are going to be, and are involved in quite complicated and quite deep pieces of work internally to try and get to grips with that. The arts have been particularly badly hit. We know that arts facilities, arts demand have had a terrible hit and are likely to continue to struggle whilst people cannot meet and gather. And so the self-employed, and these two are somewhat linked. Support for the self-employed has not been as thorough and as widespread as it has been for employees. It's not been as well taken up, and a lot of the self-employed work in the arts, and so it has been very difficult for people in self-employed, and particularly people who are relatively new to self-employment. So GDP fell by 20.4% in Q2, which was, for obvious reasons, the largest quarterly fall on record. But it then rose by 6.6% in July, which is one of the largest monthly rises on record. And we're going to see this sort of thing going on. We're going to see massive falls followed by massive rises as the economy kind of rebalances around what it's going to be like in future. The economy is still made up only about half of what it lost over the 4 or 5 months of lockdown. So we're a long way behind where we should be. So while strictly speaking, we're probably no longer in recession. That was a short recession, eh? We are still well below where we would have been, where we were in February before the lockdown began. And we are likely to remain in that situation for some time. And this is the Office of National Statistics estimates for where we are. We can see that manufacturing has recovered reasonably strongly and actually started recovering from May. It took a very big hit. Construction likewise, but as manufacturing and construction facilities have been able to open up, there's been a big improvement in those areas. And manufacturing and construction are always, in a way, canaries in the mine. If they start to fall again, then we know hard times are back on the agenda. But if they continue to increase strongly, then things are slowly getting back to normal. And we can see, we can see the way that the service sector took a hit. Most sectors, all sectors of the economy have improved since May and have continued to improve, but we haven't got back to where the huge losses in April. So where we are at the moment, according to the current figures, at the end of August, 11% of the workforce is still on partial or furlough leave. So 1 in 9 employees is still not working. Over a third of the workforce are working remotely, and only half the workforce are currently working at their normal place of work. We're expecting to see that figure increase, but it's not going to increase a great deal over the medium term, we suspect. And it's also important to stress that those people who are working remotely are very strongly concentrated in graduate occupations. And figures today, as we said, the employment of 18 to 24-year-olds fell by 146,000 in the quarter from May to July. Now, part of that is because we've got a lot of people going back into education. But also we know that young people have been especially badly affected, most likely to have been laid off. In fact, the most likely group of people to have been laid off are young women, young minority ethnic women, in fact, but young women in general. So women under 21 are the most likely group of employees to have been furloughed and the most likely group of employees to have been laid off. And they're also the most likely group of people who to still be on furlough. And whilst some of the gloomiest predictions about what's going to happen to the people on furlough have not been founded as yet, we reckon of that 11%, at least a third are at significant risk of redundancy over the next 2 months. So we could be seeing another 3 to 4% of the workforce losing their jobs, which is, again, in the order of hundreds of thousands of people. The Institute of Employment Studies' central prediction yesterday was of 650,000 people losing their jobs in the next 3 months. They've revised that down slightly because, as I said, the employment figures were slightly more optimistic than we feared. And there's also signs that the graduate labour market is perhaps not quite as badly hit as we feared. Well, vacancies are running about half of normal level. We're seeing slow and stuttering improvements, and what seems to be happening is it's improving, then plateauing out. At the moment, we're plateauing out a little bit. So vacancy levels have not improved as a proportion of their annual level for about 3 or 4 weeks. We've been running at about 51 to 55% for the last 3 or 4 weeks. Health, social care, IT and education have all held up reasonably well. Health has much the largest number of vacancies of any UK industry. We've seen signs of pick up in accounting and finance, although there's some competition and a bit of client poaching, as often happens in that sector. Law has started improving. Warehousing and logistics, which has obviously taken a very big hit, started to go up. Sports, beauty, construction, and parts of manufacturing. In particularly the automotive industry, thanks to discounts on cars, actually had a pretty good couple of months. And for those of you who have been experiencing lockdown, it will be of no surprise that the distilling industry has also done rather well. My own consumption of alcoholic products has perhaps gone up slightly more than it normally would have done over the last few months, and I'm sure there are people in the audience who are no exception. But yes, brewers and distillers for home consumption have had a pretty good few months actually, and they are starting to recruit. It's always worth stressing that our craft beer and craft distilling sector are amongst the best and most highly skilled in the world, highly sought after. So that is a source of some optimism. There is significant signs of a two-track recovery. The US economists are calling it K-shaped, which is a really nice way of putting it. Some sectors, particularly those where remote working is effective, are recovering quite rapidly, and others are recovering quite slowly. By and large, it is the graduate recruitment industries and it's the graduate economy that is recovering rapidly, with the obvious exception of the arts. Some parts of business services seem to be lagging behind as well, and we're not quite sure why, and we're trying to look into it. Some of the data is a little bit crude on those kinds of questions. We don't have quite as much nuance, but we're hearing some quite significant information that there are parts of business services that are dying. Most of business and finance seems to be doing okay. There are parts that aren't doing so well. And obviously, the aviation industry is an obvious graduate recruitment industry that isn't having a great time and is not likely to in the future. And I'm afraid we have to bring in the B word as well. Brexit does, of course, cast a very long shadow over exporting industries and those that need passporting or other rights to trade with their largest clients in the EU. So the financial services industry, manufacturing in particular, are gearing up for potential significant disruption over the next few months. And that's probably making people somewhat cautious about recruitment. How's job hunting being affected? Well, obviously there's fewer vacancies, although by no means none. It's always important to stress that it's by no means none. The trajectory of this recession looks more like the recession of the early 90s than it does in terms of the graduate recruitment market than it did the last recession. The graduate recruitment market held up remarkably well in the last recession, but the early 90s one was a bad one for jobs. And graduate unemployment peaked at about 50% higher than it did in 2008. It looks a little bit more like that. We won't get Delhi this year, so we won't know exactly what the proportion of graduates who were out of work this year will have been. But it wouldn't surprise me if it was around 10 to 11%, and we see graduate outcomes data next year showing unemployment rates of about 7.5 to 8%, higher than we're used to, but not an apocalypse by any stretch of the imagination. The crucial thing is, and I'm going to say this absolutely with absolute confidence, most graduates will get jobs. Most graduates who get jobs will get graduate level jobs. But we'll see fewer vacancies. Recruitment has changed. There's much more virtual interviewing and assessment, and actually one of the big success stories is that employers are really happy with the way virtual interviewing and assessment works. It seems to be pretty effective, and it has some advantages. It removes particularly geographic barriers to participation. So no longer, if you're being recruited virtually, you don't have to get a train ticket down to London and then claim it back or not, as the case may be. You can take that interview from your living room in Birmingham rather than travel, and that's removed quite a few barriers. There are other barriers that have been put in place to access to technology in the first place, which is significant. But the removal of those geographic barriers is a very welcome and hopefully permanent change to parts of recruitment. The timing of recruitment round may change, as this year traditional recruitment was obviously cut short, and businesses are gauging what and how much they will need in terms of new employees to adapt to the new normal. And some of that recruitment is likely to take place this autumn. It might take longer to secure jobs. Start dates may be delayed. The big one, though, is induction and onboarding is a real challenge, particularly if you're going to work for a business who are currently working remotely but anticipate working in the office or going back to normal office working to a large degree later on. And a lot of businesses are saying that onboarding and recruitment is a real challenge. The other thing to bear in mind is that even if businesses don't recruit this year, that doesn't necessarily mean they'll recruit next year. What dictates whether they'll recruit next year is whether they've got any money to recruit with. So businesses that haven't made any money this year are probably not going to struggle to recruit next year, whether or not they recruited this year. So we do have to bear that in mind. Placements in internships took a larger hit than other forms of recruitment and employment, but there are other signs of adaptation. Some really interesting innovations around virtual internship, and some of the barriers, not just in working, but in assessment and the way that we award accreditation after placement, are now being really thought about and really being challenged. And there's a lot of really rapid, really clever and innovative work going on in this space. And the pandemic has helped to fire up a small but important revolution in the way that apprenticeships and placements can be delivered. So this year has been difficult, but in the future, these experiences might stand us in good stead to be able to deliver a wider range and a more suitable range of good quality experiences for people. We know PG study has gone up. The early signs from institutions are that PG recruitment has been strong, and people will start showing up to courses soon, and it looks like things have gone up. This is entirely expected, but of course does present delivery challenges. I'm rushing through things a little bit because I realise I got to the end. And then finally, chambers have found there are still skill shortages remaining. Before COVID, about 3 in 4 businesses were struggling to fill job vacancies. Now, chambers mostly deal with medium-sized and small businesses. So this is a very important sector of the market. Low levels of productivity, increased automation and an ageing workforce are big challenges. And of course, a new points-based immigration system will increase recruitment and employment costs for firms unable to fill job vacancies from the local labour market. These are largely issues in tech, particularly in engineering and IT. Again, we went into the pandemic with shortages in tech and IT, particularly in engineering. We still have shortages in engineering, and we are going to go out of the pandemic with shortages in engineering. If you've got a civil engineering qualification, there are jobs out there for you. You have not stopped being in demand. Firms were investing less in training and development last year than they were 5 years ago. And apprenticeships are not seen as a cure-all, because particularly for smaller businesses, they need a more flexible set of training for people with wider roles, and so they're looking for more modular training, and that's getting an open ear at the Office of Students and the Department for Education. Over the rest of the year, PwC expect demand to labour fall about 5%, but jobs in health and social care will thrive. We expect to see the low carbon workforce triple, so quite a substantial increase in that area. Demands for digital skills and creativity, critical thinking, interpersonal comms skills, and different kinds, because the online world is different to the offline world, and leadership skills are more important. So here are some useful resources. I'm going to throw the floor open. I see we've got some stuff on Q&A. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Do take a look at that. The slides will be available to anybody who wants them, so just drop us a line. And that's got some links. So has anybody got any questions, Ellie?
Yes, so we've had one coming from Gina, and she wants to know if we have any insight into how graduates in animal care are doing.
Animal care has, like healthcare, been difficult to deliver because you have to go through their health. The general model for animal care is the traditional veterinary vet surgery is very similar to doctor's surgery. So we've got to social distance the way that kind of thing operates. Agriculture in the animal has fared reasonably well. We've seen from the figures that agriculture has not been greatly affected. So we would not expect a great downturn in the animal care sector. And of course, a lot of people have been locked up with their pets and spent longer with them and longer with their household companions and pets. And in the same way that this has seen a resurgence in people wanting to do home improvements, there's anecdotal evidence to suggest that this has meant people spend more on pet care as well. So it might be that this might be a slight blessing in disguise for the animal health industry.
Perfect. I think that's all we've got time for now, Charlie.
Okay.
I think we've pretty much bob on timing wise. Thank you for that, and thank you to In-House as well for having us. We do also have a stand, so if you've not virtually popped in to go see us, please make sure you do. There's a great team on there today. And also, if you're interested in labour market information, if you visit luminate.prospects@ac.uk, you can sign up to our monthly newsletter there to get all your updates.